"Dad, you've saved enough. It's time to help your family." My son Ryan slid a thick folder across my kitchen table, like he was handing me something I had already agreed to. I opened it. The number on the mortgage stopped me cold. $600,000. "You bought this house?" I asked. Ryan nodded. His wife, Melissa, sat beside him without saying a word. "And you expect me to pay for it?" Melissa finally leaned forward. "Henry, you have one son. What exactly are you saving all that money for?" That was when I understood. They weren't asking me to help with a down payment. They had already bought the house, already taken on the debt, and now they expected my retirement savings to rescue them. Ryan looked straight at me. "Melissa deserves a proper home. Your money is just sitting there." I closed the folder. "No." One word changed everything. Ryan's face hardened. "You said you'd always help me." "I said I'd help you. I never agreed to take responsibility for a $600,000 house you bought without asking me." For 63 years, I had never imagined I would need to explain that distinction to my own son. I was a retired electrical contractor. My wife had died years earlier, and Ryan was my only child. I had spent decades working early mornings, weekends, and emergency jobs to build enough savings that I could retire without becoming his financial responsibility. Ironically, Ryan now seemed to believe that careful saving had made his financial decisions my responsibility. Melissa stood. "So that's your answer?" "Yes." Ryan grabbed the folder. "Fine." They walked out. For the next several days, neither returned my calls. I knew Ryan well enough to recognize what he was doing. Silence had always been his strongest weapon with me because he knew I hated the thought of losing my only son. I almost called again. Almost offered some smaller amount just to end the fight. But I stopped myself. They had made a $600,000 decision before speaking to me. I wasn't going to turn their decision into my debt simply because Ryan knew how much our relationship mattered to me. Then, 6 days later, someone knocked on my front door. A man I had never seen before stood on my porch. "Henry Lawson." "Yes." He handed me an envelope. "You've been served." My stomach tightened. I opened it inside the house. Ryan Lawson and Melissa Lawson. Plaintiffs. Henry Lawson. Defendant. My own son was suing me for $600,000. According to the complaint, Ryan claimed I had promised to financially provide for the house. He and Melissa argued they had purchased it relying on that promise, and that my refusal had caused them substantial financial damage. I read the allegation twice, then a third time, because Ryan hadn't just decided to punish me for saying no. He was claiming he could prove that my money had been promised to him before he ever placed those mortgage documents on my kitchen table. And as I stood there holding a lawsuit filed by my only son, one question wouldn't leave my mind. How could Ryan prove a promise I knew I had never made? The next morning, I walked into attorney Rebecca Shaw's office carrying years of conversations with my son. Printed emails, text messages, anything involving money. Rebecca spent nearly an hour reading while I sat across from her, watching her expression. Finally, she stopped. "Henry, I think I found what they're relying on." She turned her laptop toward me. It was an email I remembered sending months earlier, after Ryan told me he and Melissa wanted to settle down. My words were right there. "When the time comes, I'll always help you get settled." I stared at the sentence. That's it. That appears to be the centerpiece of their claim. I almost laughed. There wasn't even a house then. I know. No price, no mortgage, nothing. Rebecca nodded. That distinction matters. Ryan's lawyer was trying to turn a father's casual promise of future support into a commitment to finance a specific $600,000 property. But what hurt more was knowing Ryan understood the context. Later that afternoon, I saw him outside Rebecca's building. Ryan. He stopped. I walked toward him. Withdraw the lawsuit. His jaw tightened. You should have kept your word. I never promised to buy Melissa a house. You promised to help me. And somehow that became $600,000. Ryan glanced away. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. Melissa thinks you've controlled me with money for years. Controlled you. You always made sure I knew you had the safety net. Now that I actually need it, suddenly there are conditions. I stared at my son. This isn't a safety net, Ryan. You bought a house and handed me the bill. He stepped closer. Then let the court decide. For a moment, I seriously considered ending it. I could offer a settlement. Lose some money, avoid a public fight, and maybe preserve whatever remained between us. When I told Rebecca, she shook her head. Don't decide, because you're afraid your son will stop speaking to you. Then she pulled the complaint closer. There's something else. She pointed to a date. The purchase agreement. I recognized it immediately. My son had signed for the house before he ever brought those mortgage documents into my kitchen. Rebecca looked at me. If they purchased the property relying on your promise, we need to know exactly what happened before this date. She immediately requested the purchase records, lender communications, emails, and relevant messages through discovery. For the first time, we weren't simply defending my refusal. We were investigating what Ryan and Melissa had done before they ever asked me for money. 2 days later, Rebecca called. Ryan's attorney responded. I gripped the phone. And he's not withdrawing anything. There was a brief silence. They're formally pushing this toward trial. By the time I walked into a family gathering 2 weeks later, Ryan had already put me on trial somewhere else. In front of my relatives. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. My brother eventually pulled me aside. Henry, is it true? Is what true? That you promised Ryan you'd help him buy a house and then backed out after he bought it. I looked across the room. Ryan was standing beside Melissa. That was when I understood what they had been telling people. My brother lowered his voice. You've got plenty saved, Henry. Why let your own son risk losing his home? There it was again. My retirement savings being treated like evidence against me. Before I could answer, Melissa spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. We never would have purchased that house if we didn't believe Henry was going to help us. Several people turned toward me. Ryan said nothing. I could have defended myself for 20 minutes. Instead, I looked directly at him. Ryan, when did I see the house? His expression changed. What? Before you bought it, tell everyone when you showed me the house. Melissa stepped forward. This isn't about whether you physically saw. I asked Ryan. The room became quiet. Ryan looked down. I continued. What was the address? Dad, come on. Before you signed the purchase agreement, when did you tell me the address? He couldn't answer. Melissa immediately changed direction. You knew we wanted a home. You knew we were trying to build a future. But everyone had heard the question. And everyone had watched Ryan avoid it. I left without arguing further. The next morning, Rebecca called me into her office. Part of the lender file had arrived. She placed several pages in front of me. Look at these dates. Ryan and Melissa had been pursuing the property before I even knew where it was. Their financial position was also tighter than they had admitted. The mortgage they wanted would put serious pressure on their income. Then Rebecca showed me something worse. My supposed financial support had already been discussed as a potential source of money. I stared at the paperwork. But I never agreed to that. I know. So why is my money being discussed? That, Rebecca said, is what we need to establish. Until that moment, I had believed Melissa had simply convinced Ryan that his retired father was wealthy enough to rescue them after an impulsive purchase. Now the timeline suggested something different. They had been thinking about my savings while arranging the deal. Before I had seen the house. Before I had seen the mortgage. Before anyone had asked me for permission. That evening, Rebecca called again. Her voice was different this time. "Henry, I've been reviewing the next batch of records. What did you find?" She paused. "Henry, they weren't counting on your generosity." Another pause. "They were counting on your guilt." 3 weeks before trial, Rebecca covered her conference table with documents. "Before you decide whether you still want to settle," she said, "you need to see the entire timeline." She placed the purchase agreement first. Ryan and Melissa had selected the house. Then they signed. Then came lender communications, discussing how tight their finances would be. And scattered between those documents were private messages between my son and his wife. Rebecca handed me one. It was from Melissa, written shortly before Ryan came to my kitchen with the mortgage folder. "He'll agree eventually. He won't risk losing you over money." I stopped reading. For years, Ryan had known that losing contact with him was one of my greatest fears. Melissa knew it too. And there it was, written plainly. Not gratitude. Leverage. Rebecca slid another message toward me. This one was from Ryan. "What if Dad says he never promised a specific amount?" I looked up. "He wrote that." Rebecca nodded. The answer from Melissa came underneath. She referred to my old email, the one where I said I would always help Ryan get settled, and argued that it should give them enough leverage to make me cooperate. That changed everything. Ryan hadn't misunderstood my words. Before he ever handed me that $600,000 mortgage, he had already questioned whether I had actually promised a specific amount. And he knew the answer. I hadn't. I leaned back. So the kitchen wasn't a request. Rebecca shook her head. Based on these messages, they had already committed themselves financially. Then they approached you. The lawsuit suddenly looked exactly like that afternoon in my kitchen, only with attorneys attached. First, create the obligation. Then make refusing it painful enough that I would surrender. Rebecca closed the file. "Settlement is still available, Henry. If you want this finished privately, we can discuss an offer." For months, that possibility had tempted me. Not because I owed Ryan anything. Because he was my only son. But I looked again at Melissa's message. "He won't risk losing you over money." No. Rebecca watched me carefully. "No settlement. No settlement." I pushed the papers back toward her. "If I pay them now, I'm confirming a promise they already knew I never made." The case went to trial. Ryan testified first. He told the court he genuinely believed I had committed to helping him establish a home with Melissa. Then Rebecca stood. She began with the purchase agreement. Then the lender communications. Then the messages. One date after another appeared in sequence. The house had been chosen before I knew the address. The commitment had been made before I saw the mortgage. My savings had been discussed before anyone obtained my consent. Rebecca was about to continue when the judge raised his hand. "Counsel, one moment." The courtroom went silent. The judge turned toward me. "Mr. Lawson." I looked up. He leaned forward. "I have one question for you." The judge looked directly at me. "Mr. Lawson, did you ever agree to buy this house?" "No, Your Honor." Ryan shifted in his seat. The judge glanced toward Rebecca, and she continued laying out what the documents showed. There was no signed agreement between Ryan and me. No email where I promised $600,000. No text where I agreed to make mortgage payments. I had never participated in negotiations for the property. I hadn't approved the house. I hadn't even known its address before Ryan and Melissa committed themselves to buying it. The email they had built their case around said only, "When the time comes, I'll always help you get settled." It had been written months earlier, when no specific house, price, or mortgage was being discussed. But the most damaging evidence wasn't my email. It was theirs. Rebecca displayed Ryan's message. What if Dad says he never promised a specific amount? Ryan stared at the table. Then came Melissa's response about using my old email as leverage. And finally, the message I couldn't forget. He'll agree eventually. He won't risk losing you over money. The timeline was unmistakable. They selected the house. They committed themselves financially. They discussed using my savings. Then Ryan arrived at my kitchen carrying mortgage documents and acted as though my involvement had already been decided. The documents hadn't been brought to me for approval. They had been brought to me for pressure. Ryan tried to explain. I was trying to give my wife some security. I looked at him. You provide security for your family with decisions you can afford, Ryan. You don't make the decision first and hand somebody else the bill. He lowered his eyes. I didn't feel victorious watching him sit there. That was my son. The boy I had spent decades trying to protect was now sitting across a courtroom because he had believed my fear of losing him could be turned into $600,000. The court rejected their claim. There would be no $600,000 payment from me. Ryan and Melissa remained responsible for the financial commitment they had voluntarily made, and the legal expenses from pursuing the case only added pressure to an already difficult mortgage. The consequences followed them outside the courtroom, too. Relatives who had been told I suddenly abandoned a promise began learning what had actually happened. They saw the dates. They heard about the messages. The same people who had asked why I wouldn't help my son now understood that I hadn't withdrawn from an agreement. There had never been one. Melissa could no longer tell everyone that they purchased the property because I had promised to finance it. Their own messages had destroyed that version of events. For me, the biggest change happened quietly. I stopped treating my savings as something I might eventually have to surrender to preserve my relationship with Ryan. I reviewed my finances and estate arrangements and made sure everything was documented clearly. No vague expectations. No assumptions. No one would ever again be able to turn an affectionate sentence from a father into supposed authority over everything he had earned. Months passed before Ryan contacted me. His message was short. Dad, can we meet? Just you and me. No Melissa. No lawyers. No financial documents. I agreed, but I gave him one condition. We are not discussing me paying your mortgage. His answer came several minutes later. Okay. When we finally sat together, I didn't pretend everything was repaired. Neither did Ryan. There were things between us that an apology couldn't erase overnight. But for the first time, I wasn't sitting across from my son wondering what saying no might cost me. Ryan and Melissa had to restructure their finances around what they could actually afford. Their house was their responsibility. Their choices were their responsibility. And my retirement remained mine. I was willing to rebuild a relationship with my son slowly, provided it was based on respect instead of financial pressure. But I would never purchase that relationship. For years, I had believed saying no might cost me my only son. That $600,000 lawsuit taught me something harder and more important. Any relationship that required $600,000 to survive was already in trouble long before the judge entered the courtroom.